I think everyone's phone is definitely switched off by now, so I will turn off the mic and hand over to our MC, Anthony D. Kelly, who will introduce our fabulous guest, both in the room and online.
Yeah, and I do want to echo Deirdre. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thanks for coming on such a beautiful day for this the conversation about poetry, collage, publication, a lot of mediums that really interact together, that have a lot of resonance with each other, and how they kind of spark inspiration and spark, visuals from words, words from visuals. I also want to say thank you very much to Ric Kasini Kadour, who is joining us from Sankar in Scotland, for his part in this conversation and for the information and for the conversation he's going to share with us. I'll just do a few brief introductions and then I'll hand it over to Ric, and he will give us a presentation and show us some images. So, and I'll also introduce Eve. Yes, so Ric Kasini Kadour is a writer, artist, publisher, and cultural worker. He was a recipient of the 2020 to 2021 curatorial fellowship from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. His art making crosses media and includes collage, photography, printmaking, installation, and art product making. Kadour sees zine making as an extension of his art practice. His work has been exhibited in Georgia, Ireland, Louisiana, Ontario, Pennsylvania, Quebec, Scotland, Tennessee, Vermont, and Wisconsin, and is in private collections in Australia, Canada, France, the United States, and the United Kingdom. In addition to his art practice, Kadour is the founding editor and publisher of Collage magazine and has written for a number of galleries. And his writing has appeared in Hyperallergic, Vermont magazine, 7 Days, Seattle Weekly, Art New England, where he was the former Vermont editor, and many others. He has produced a number of exhibits as gallerist and curator. The community organizing efforts have resulted in a number of large-scale events in North America and beyond. And I had the pleasure of working with him actually in August 2021 when he curated an exhibition of international collage artists as part of the Empty Columns Are Place to Dream project, and that took place during the Burr Vintage Week and Arts Festival in County Offaly. And that exhibition actually received a 2021 National Heritage Award, which was pretty cool. Hello, Ric, I can see you on a screen in front of me. And I'll just introduce Eve also before I hand over to Ric. Marie Kimmerling is an group analyst in private practice based in County Mayo in the west of Ireland. Deeply rooted in her rural west of Ireland context, she was astounded into being, what a beautiful phrase, as a collage artist in creative response to the often turbulent, fragmented, and disembodied nature of our current times. While she has over 20 years of experience working as a therapist, she is relatively new to her art-making practice. Doesn't show. Having started in 2022, as an artist, she sees her collage work as an extension of her group analytic practice, the group she belongs to, and the wider social context, their wider social context, I should say, inform and influence the collages she creates. Creating her colorful pieces became a way of reflecting on, processing, and expressing themes arising in her work as a group analyst. I got a little bit of an introduction already. Yeah, I write poetry, short stories. I'm a collage artist. I'm thankfully honored with the title of World Collage Day Artist in 2023 by the Kolaj Institute. And I've founded the Conic Collage Collective, which has been so much fun actually to facilitate, and it's been a joy to be part of. And I was one of the curators on the Intentional Selection Festival, which is in the space around us. So I'll hand it over to Ric.
Well, thank you, Anthony. And it's a pleasure to join you from Sankar today. I'm going to share a little bit of my publishing journey, as it were. And I really appreciate the attention to this topic. Kolaj Institute has been very interested in publishing and the role of publishing plays. But to tell you a little bit about how I got here and kind of my journey with publishing, it really starts back in Vermont in the United States in 2005. And I was a younger state editor for a regional art magazine called Art New England. And I very much wanted a list of all the places you could see art in Vermont. And I walked into a bookstore one day and I asked the bookseller if they had such a book. And her response was, "No, you should write one." And I laughed and my partner laughed. And a month later, we were writing that book. And then about a year later, we were publishing that book. And that became the Vermont Art Guide. And it was the first time we were able to kind of pull together a project and put it out into the world. So that was my first book publication. My first zine publication actually took place during that time because I was invited to speak on a panel about pricing artwork. And I had prefaced my comments with a poem that really spoke to the ridiculousness of how the art market prices artwork. And so many people asked me for a copy of that poem. After the panel, I decided to make it a little zine and illustrated it with some artwork that I had made at the time. And that really became the start of a zine making practice. From there, as my partner and I opened and ran a series of galleries, and first in Vermont and then in Montreal, we also created a print shop. And that print shop allowed us to print artist catalogs that would support exhibitions. And then we started kind of publishing projects from artists. And we ran that print shop from 2006 to 2019. But in 2011, we started Collage magazine in November. And this came out of, it was an idea that was hatched because I had an artist in the gallery and I was encouraging them to think big and to kind of engage in a bigger project. And they said, let's do a book about collage. And because I have an unending well of energy, I said, no, let's make it a magazine. And we scurried together to pull together an issue for Expozine, which is Montreal's annual zine and kind of art book fair. And we debuted that at Expozine in November of 2011. And we kind of put the word out for artists, and it's just been a wild ride from there. As we were publishing the magazine, we discovered that a lot of collage artists were making books, not just zines, but full-on either art books or catalogs of their work or combinations of poetry and collage. And they were publishing in a lot of different ways. And so in around 2017, we created the Collage Magazine Books Directory, which specifically tried to kind of aggregate and document this sort of publishing practice that we were seeing in the international collage community that we were speaking to in the magazine. And what we were able to do with that is start collecting both physical books, but also news and information about the books that artists were publishing. In 2019, we organized a symposium at Volume Montreal, which is the city's annual book fair. And in that symposium, we really brought folks together to explore this idea that the book is a place of collage, that we think of art as something that gets exhibited in galleries, but what happens when we think about its main form of diffusion as being one of publishing? And what are the positives and negatives of that? Around that time, we also were founding Kolaj Institute. Kolaj Institute is a nonprofit organization that supports artists, curators, writers who want to study, document, and disseminate ideas that kind of deepen our understanding around collage as a medium, a genre, a community, and ultimately a 21st century art movement. And in that, we very much thought about how Collage Institute could operate not only as a gallery, but also as a publisher and a library and an archive. And so that's kind of some of the work that we've been doing lately. In 2021, we started a program called Collage and Illustration, where we brought collage artists together to illustrate outdated, but ultimately important texts. The first book we did was called Oh Money Money by Eleanor Porter, and it was in conjunction with an exhibition about money as a cultural idea that was taking place in Milwaukee in 2021. And in that, what we invited collage artists to do was to interpret this early 20th century text for a 21st century audience. And then we published that book, kind of reviving a kind of forgotten novel. And since then, we have had projects where we've looked at Frankenstein or The Awakening or Orlando, all books that are kind of older titles, and we're thinking about how artists can kind of bring these into the 21st century. And also around that time, we started offering publishing workshops where we would work with artists on how to kind of take their ideas and bring them into the publishing format. Last year, we started a project called Poetry X Collage. This actually was a new journal, and it came out of our broader investigation of this intersection of poetry and collage, where we found that a number of artists were either making collage in response to poetry or making collage that was operating as poetry and using text. And we didn't feel that there was a venue for a lot of this work. And so we created a journal that essentially allows the artist to have a free zone of thinking, meaning they control every aspect of the page spread. And in doing that, they're able to kind of put forward a vision and an idea about this intersection of poetry and collage. Also, as we've moved through and evolved over time, we've started kind of using books as a way of documenting and exploring our ideas around projects. And so our most recent title, Magic in the Modern World, it's not only a collection of the artwork that was produced in that project, but also all of the curatorial research and critical framing of that artwork that we think informs that experience. And in this sense, we're really trying to kind of maximize what the value of the book is. And I think about this a lot in terms of the book versus the exhibition. And I don't think they're necessarily in conflict, but it's helpful to kind of look at the pros and cons of both. And in that sense, books are an incredible means of diffusing artwork. It's a way to put artwork out into the world. And the books have the benefit of outliving an exhibition. Where an exhibition might be a month or 2 or 3, a book kind of lives forever. And also a book transcends geography, which for the international collage community was really important. Because if we were doing an exhibition in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the US, it was really difficult for folks in Slovenia or Ireland or Latin America or Africa or Asia or Australia to kind of visit that exhibition. But we could absolutely mail them a book about that exhibition, and they would have a different experience of that project and the ideas ultimately that we were trying to put out in the world. The other benefit of a book is that where exhibitions are time limited, a book is forever. And so when you make a book about a project, an exhibition, a body of work, an artist, what you have is a document that outlives the exhibition and a document that can serve the needs of history. Meaning the books we've published in the last 20 years from now, somebody can pull them off a shelf and kind of see what we were doing and read what we were thinking. And I think that's incredibly valuable for a medium or a genre like collage that doesn't have a deep art history and doesn't have an art history that is well understood. And so we're building the kind of reference points, and other artists and other collage artists are doing this as well, but we're building those reference points that future art historians will be able to look back upon. The book can also be an incredible archive, particularly in the collage community where collage artists come together around community projects. And so, for example, in 2020, the Mystic Crew of Scissors and Glue in New Orleans created a project that invited collage artists from around the world to make a collage in response to this particular carnival float illustration from the 18th century. And that project became Unfamiliar Vegetables. And the book, which continues to live on, is ultimately an archive and document of the artwork that was created through that project. And lastly, I think the book is a great way of documenting our culture work. That if we think about why we make art, why we do exhibitions, why we put art out in the world, it's not just kind of the objects themselves, but also the thinking around them and the process that we go through and the ideas and the impact that we want to have, how we want to contribute to our community. All of that can be expressed in an exhibition, but it can also be expressed in a book. And I think that's an incredibly wonderful tool to have. Now, my journey over the last 20 years of book publishing was not always easy. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that neither the ecosystem of art and the ecosystem of books is really able to kind of wrap their head around niche art publishing. So for example, if we wanted to distribute our books in bookstores, a lot of booksellers will go, there's maybe 2 people who are going to be interested in this. Why would we want to carry this in our bookshop? And in a similar way, if we try to distribute books through a network of galleries and art centers and art spaces, right? A lot of art spaces think of themselves as, we do exhibitions, we're not a bookshop. And so we kind of fall through the cracks in that. But our approach has always been to build a community. That's how we built the magazine. That's how we built our publishing. And so our approach is to kind of build this community of folks who have a like and shared interest, and ultimately kind of provide books and distribute books in that way. Now, I'm happy to say that there's been a number of libraries that have bought and collected our books throughout the years. And that also means that they're placed in institutions where they'll have a kind of life beyond ourselves. And lastly, I would kind of add this thought as we're thinking about books. Books allow you to think really long term. You can put something in a book and it can really exist for a really long time. If I go back to that original zine, How to Price Your Art from 2005, I reissued and reworked that zine in 2015. It's now coming up almost on its 20th anniversary of being made. And it is a zine that you can go on our website today and buy a copy. It continues to live on and continues to kind of exist in the world. Had that been an exhibition, it would be long forgotten at this point. And I think that's where books are kind of really interesting as a vehicle of culture work. As it relates to collage, I think that collage is uniquely suited for book format. And part of that is because collage is often small, it's often intimate. And particularly when we look at collage and poetry, it's a different experience to sit in a comfy chair in your own living room and read collage and poetry versus if you're seeing that kind of on the wall of a gallery. Those are just different experiences. But I think for a lot of work, the intimacy of collage is enhanced when it's in book form. And lastly, and I'll just end with this, collage art is part of what we do by the nature of our medium is to appropriate print culture. And I think it makes absolute sense that we are also adding to that print culture. And in that sense, we come from kind of magazines and books and printed material, and we should make magazines and books and printed material. So those are my thoughts on this subject. Thank you for letting me share that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rick. And there'll be some opportunity for questions from the audience for Rick at the end, but I suppose just out amongst yourselves at the minute, I'm wondering if you have any questions, Eve, or
a comment more. I was struck by the idea of diffusion and books as a way of means of diffusion, and also that idea of kind of collage capturing a historical moment. And I've encountered you, Rick, from a couple of the collage residencies, and just and that idea of small and I I suppose just as a comment, it's something I'm still struggling with because I make big things. And I was just wondering what, yeah, about the variety of books and way, you know, the creativity when it comes to the format of books and what you've encountered in that regard, and how much of it is for the artist to work within that restraint or constraint, which I know is important, and what you've come across in terms of the creativity of the book format itself, and how those two things interact. Just kind of a
Yeah, I think that's kind of part of the fun and part of the challenge, because there's a line there that needs to be walked. But also I think that it's a question of how you want the book to exist in the world. So there's a lot of art books and books about art that are a little obtuse. And there's one I like to make fun of a little bit. I'm not going to call them out, but it is a white book with a white cover and white lettering. And and it doesn't function well as a book that you can just kind of get basic information about. And I think I respect every creative endeavor and their right to do that. What we have tried to do is try to figure out how we adapt these things into book format in a way that they're going to work. And even more recently, like, I'm starting to kind of rethink how we produce books, particularly about some of the projects we do. And so Magic in the Modern World, for example, which was really bringing artists together to explore this idea of magic, but also how magic plays in a very modern, scientifically, rationally driven world. And also what's some of the history of that? How does that play out? Well, in creating that book, there's some very practical considerations around how it's going to exist on a bookshelf. You know, so we adopt a standard 6x9 is a North American standard 6-inch by 9-inch kind of format. And the book looks like the kind of book you'd see in an airport. And that's intentional, right? Because we already know the concept and the idea is a hard sell. We think we can kind of get it to diffuse more if we can make it fit where we want it to go. By contrast, you know, I think there's a lot of potential to do very creative things in bookmaking. And in my own art practice, for example, one of my favorite things I ever made was a scroll, a big collage scroll with a poem on one side and a collage on the other. And I kind of made it so it fits in this box. It's kind of an artist book. It's edition. But for me, that kind of breaking all the rules and stepping outside of the constrictions was really fun and exciting. But I also don't expect that book to go very far, and I don't expect it to be carried in a bookshop. And that's the tension I think we live with artists, yeah, as artists.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. I'm interested also in that kind of change in format, and actually I'm working on a body of work that will go into a book. I'll share one piece a little bit later on, but it will be quite awkward to go on a bookshelf, right? But you'll see it. I'm interested in how it might remain on the table or in front of somebody, I guess, if it's just not going to be neatly stowed away. But also I'd like to comment on the presentation and some of the things that you said there, Rick, because I joined you guys in New Orleans for Collage Fest this summer, and with both the dissemination of books and the exhibitions that you're putting on, it was a real joy to be there and see people really consider the medium from so many different angles, but in so much depth as well, right? And starting to build a kind of a broad base of not just academic knowledge, which of course is important, but also like quite emotional knowledge. There was a great presentation on grief actually through Collage, and the bookmaking, actually a tiny miniature book was handed out at the end of that. Celine Browning, her work is fantastic. And you've answered most of my questions, actually, not to sound lazy or anything, in the presentation. But something I did wonder was, I joined the Frankenstein residency at the end of last summer. And I had spent the summer reading, actually, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is a very surprising book. And I found that because I knew I was going to illustrate it at the end of the summer, I had a very different relationship with the book. I mean, I read visually anyway, but every second paragraph was pushing a scene up for me internally. And I was wondering if that was an aspect that you guys considered when selecting it for the focus of a residency, or when you're going back through like that catalogue of books, what is it that calls to you that makes you feel like, okay, this is something we would like to have a residency on, or this book will be one that is a worthy candidate, right?
Yeah, I think Frankenstein is an interesting book because it's one that seems to populate our public consciousness. Frankenstein is not an unfamiliar word. We all have ideas around it collectively as a humanity and a society. Not all of us have read it, and that also kind of is an interesting observation. I mean, there's an online meme, right? The Frankenstein is the doctor, not the monster. Trying to correct that idea. And so there's a lot of misconception and misunderstanding around that book. But that book is also speaking to themes that are still relevant to us today. And but the text itself can feel stuck in the past. It's hard to read Frankenstein as a contemporary novel. And I think what collage artists are able to do, and I'm really excited to release that book in October, by the way, is to kind of really create art that invites the reader to think about these old texts as being about now, right? And I think as the artists, I think the collage artists have done a really remarkable job of bringing it into the present moment. That some of the illustrations evoke a kind of 19th century aesthetic, but a lot of them evoke a very 21st century aesthetic. And I think that book in particular is inviting us to think about things that maybe Shelley never really thought about around gender and the body, and things that are important to us today that we're wrestling and really struggling with. That book becomes a metaphor for these other ideas. And the collage artist can kind of draw that out and point to that in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. I noticed actually after reading the book, I don't refer to him as the monster anymore. I can only refer to him as the creature, or a creature, or I feel a kind of an affinity now towards the creature. Actually, after reading the book, it was quite surprising. Yeah, it's a surprising book. Okay, so Rick, you'll probably disappear off the screen for a little while, but you'll still be part of the conversation. We're going to bring up some of Eve's work, and she will talk us through her lovely practice.
Okay, great. Maybe you'll see when I'm talking my way through these different pieces why I asked Rick the question about the book. I'm still struggling creatively with a lot of the work I make is quite long, sometimes 2 meters long and kind of maybe 80 centimeters wide. So I haven't resolved creatively how to think about the book when it comes to my work. So maybe just before I talk my way through the pieces, I'll just say a word or two about kind of my approach to collage. And it's funny, I suppose, thinking about collage and poetry. It almost, like, there's a few words that I've kind of come across. I've done a couple of the residencies with the Kolaj Institute, one on curating collage, and more recently the poetry and collage one just in past May. But it's almost like I find myself using words and images, but I don't think of the words as poetry, and I don't think of the images on their own. So for me, they're kind of inextricably bound up with each other. And I was talking to somebody earlier who was at a workshop here as part of the Intentional Selection Festival that was through Irish. And there's a phrase in Irish that really sort of speaks to how I see collage, and which is the word fucha, which means inextricably tangled together. So for me, the words and the images, there's another word that I came across doing the collage and poetry workshop, which is signiconic or signiconic, which is sign and icon. And somehow that composite word, where it's both about the sign and the icon, or the word and the icon, sort of, for me, so, and it's the juxtaposition in a way, and that there's there's always a creative tension between sort of things that are opposite. So, and I suppose a lot of I started making my work really only early in 2022, and I work with groups, and I suppose I was trying to make sense of a lot of the experiences of these turbulent times post-COVID, and I think it was the beginning of the Russia invading Ukraine, and there was just such a lot going on in groups and in the world, and I was trying to find a way to make sort of, I just felt full of all this experience, including working online with groups and therapeutically as well. And as a therapist, the idea of reverie is kind of key. It's sort of just trying to find a way to put words on experience that doesn't yet have words. And I really like the parallel between collage as working with fragments and trying to make something out of fragments. And in a way, when I'm working with groups are made up of individuals, but they kind of come together as fragments, and sometimes often have something to offer each other. So for me, those two processes kind of come together. And I know Anthony put me in, made me aware of something, I think it was the Frank Olson project, which talks about the collage method, which is kind of, again, a way of using collage to kind of move towards integrating unprocessed experiences. So that's how I see my work in a way. So maybe I'll just kind of go through some of the images just with that background in place. The name on my website is Collage Reverie. So I suppose just, I like that idea of reverie as a way of just I don't think too much when I'm putting stuff together. The thinking comes afterwards. And early in 2022, I think, I did the Artist's Way, that workbook, and it really encourages you just to notice what you're drawn to and what you're, I suppose, repelled by, and kind of to follow that curiosity. So that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. So maybe just, there's a bit of me reluctant to read out the words on their own, because as I just said, for me, they go with the images, but I'll read them anyway. So on this piece, it's called Merging and Emerging, Lost and Found, and Lost Again, Evolus. And evolus is the Irish for in a vacuum, or in a hole. And I use a lot of layering, and I use tissue paper and card and just found images that I found in magazines. And then I kind of am a bit like a magpie when I'm reading. I gather phrases and words, more phrases that I like. And I have a bag of stuff, and I tend to just pick out phrases and words, or I might start with a tissue paper or a particular color that picks up something in the image. So maybe we can move on to the next image. And this one said, from the crest of a towering wave, the galvanizing moment, a safe harbor. So, and again, I suppose there's things, the crest of a towering wave, there's things lurking in the sea, there's maybe monsters, or something about risk taking and what happens in risk taking. So maybe the next image. So I'll read out the text of this one as well, starting at the top. Strangely adrift, a psychosocial soup, searching for a North Star, finding ground, a deep map. Maybe I'll move on to the next image. relationships of repair, the gradual inversion of despair, astounded into being, the mend must be much greater than the tear. And again, in this image, I suppose I was experimenting with using stitching. It's kind of the idea of groups and the connections. So I'm always interested in the interrelatedness of people and things. And I suppose as a group analyst, part of how I experience and view the world is that, you know, we're open systems, so we're impacted by others. So and there's this idea of the artist matrix, where in a way, you know, what's inside all of us is also outside. So that in a way that the artist never works on their own, that somehow we're expressing something that we're encountering in the sort of social milieu or the groups or the environments that we're in. And for me, that would be, I suppose, just a key thing, really. So maybe the next image then. This one. The great chain of being, a luminous stream. The wheel turns, knitting us loosely through warp and weft. I was experimenting with weaving bits of paper together here, and I like the idea of kind of finding ways to kind of show the relationship between different images, or the connectedness of things, and something about the relationship between the particular and the universal as well. So maybe, and then the last two images I'll just say a little bit about. They're works in progress. So this is something that I'm just working on. I took part recently in the Poetry and Collage residency with the Kolaj Institute. And this is me trying to grapple with how to put something into a book format. I haven't successfully figured out how to do it yet. So the group of us who did that residency are continuing to meet online fortnightly, and sort of challenging each other to try different poetic forms. And so this was a high bun is a type of poetic form that involves quite a short descriptive piece of prose followed by a haiku. So I'm kind of trying to figure out how to do this, and the juxtaposition is between patterns of uprooting and in full bloom. And I think I don't think I'll be able to see the text to read the high bun, but it, you know, in the book format, I suppose there's the gutter, which is the bit in the middle if you're doing a page spread. So I'm kind of playing around with how to fit something in a book format, and the creative challenge remains. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but the value of being in that cohort of people who are continuing to meet is you get feedback, and you know, are influenced by others' ideas. So I'm looking forward to our next meeting, and maybe I'll get some ideas and inspiration there. And then just maybe I'll say something about the last image, and then again, this is another work in progress. I'll just read the words. The words are entangled lives, connected solitude, the great divide. It's the storm we share. And maybe just pause at that one. Just go back. Yeah, that part of the image. I'm experimenting at the moment with just, I really like there's something called asemic writing, which is just where the text is not necessarily making sense, but just it's writing for how it looks visually. So I've just been experimenting, and I liked the idea of using the words connected solitude and the great divide to connect these two characters who, and I quite like I during COVID, somebody I know had a subscription to the New York Review of Books, and it's always very zeitgeisty with interesting headlines and images. So I quite like images of portraits that seem to be looking straight at you. So these two characters really seem to be quite separate, and been reading a lot recently about sort of people on phones and this idea of connected solitude, and then the great divide. but yet the first image is just about how entangled actually our minds can be with other people's minds. And it's the juxtaposition of those two ideas. So I haven't, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see I haven't figured out quite how to put them all together, but it involves kind of deciding what bits of, I like tissue paper and I like tearing. And I don't like cutting and scissors, which is a bit uncollagey because but I came to a couple of World Collage Day workshops here in the Linenhall with Hazel Walker. And I remember her showing us what, when you tear stuff, you know, you can get these really great edges. So I'm experimenting with writing on the edges, and I'm not sure that that works quite, but anyway, I'm playing around with it, and some of it's about play and fun and happy accidents. So maybe I'll stop there and leave
That's
the,
perfect.
hope I got the time okay. So
I like tearing things up too, just to let you know that. Yeah, I mean, your work is really beautiful, and you've covered, actually, I was going to ask you, you know, your pieces, they incorporate images and text in direct relationship to one another. But as such kind of collage elements act as stanzas and text as visual elements. And I know we had a conversation about disjunction, actually, but also how not only is there space between the elements, there's kind of space for somebody who's viewing your work to come into a greater relationship with it. Also, that concept of disjunction. Can you?
yeah,
tell us
a
bit
guy
about that?
called, I think it's Rod Boyer, came and talked to us on the collage and poetry and collage residency, and he was talking about the idea of disjunction, you know, of that you juxtapose two things, and if the disjunction is too great, it kind of loses the potential for meaning. So there has to be, but it's in the gap between the two images or the word and the image that meaning can maybe be found, or, you know, but also, you know, in making something, it's how the person who's looking at it makes meaning out of it, as much as what the artist intends as the meaning. And I suppose being someone who works with groups, I'm quite interested in that idea. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's really important. I think at some point as artists, we need to understand that somebody else's interpretation of our work is going to be different from what we intended, and that's actually okay. And it can be really beautiful to hear that back from people, right? And that they can have a more intimate relationship with the work that we've created, if they can be an active person in their interpretation. They're kind of active in the creative process.
Mm.
I'm wondering if Rick has any questions for you.
Yeah, I love that idea that about Rod Boyer's kind of theories around disjunction. And I'm curious, Eve, how working in poetry and collage has influenced or impacted how you think about artwork that is not about poetry necessarily.
Mm.
Like, one of the things I get from Rod's theory is that every fragment of a collage is kind of like a word in a haiku. And so you can read a collage the way you read a poem. And you don't need the text necessarily to be there. But then when the text is there, it becomes just another fragment, another element. So I'm curious about how you relate to work that isn't using text now, and if that's evolved or changed.
Well, I think he was talking about something about the cut, you know, even, well, in haiku, there's kind of the cut of sort of, there'll be a phrase and then something that just it comes in sort of from the side or differently. So I suppose it's interesting maybe then to think about things without words and how they manage that. Yeah, and I suppose, yeah, I'm not sure I have thought about that much actually. But I suppose I was thinking about the book again though, and one of the people that inspired me. I was at an exhibition in Munich, and it was, I think there's a Lebanese artist called Ethel Adnan, and she does these leporellos. They're like concertina books.
Mhm.
And I had just come back from Munich and seen these concertina books that she had in Lebanese script with color, and I really just liked the combination of those. So I don't know if, I don't, but there's something. And then I remember coming to do the World Collage Day workshop, and there was kind of blank concertina book things here. This is one of something I made at that first thing. But I suppose a concertina book is a book, and then it's also, so maybe there's the idea of scrolls, somehow a way of doing something long. So I might I kind of think about that a little bit as resolving the problem. But I suppose it can be visual, it can be just visual, or have words inserted in there too. I like the idea. I like the mix. I'm quite wedded to the mix, I think. So your question is about how I would view art. But I suppose just being able to look for that disjunction in things as well, or color, that colors that seem to be opposing or different. So yeah.
Something well that can be quite interesting is, I've said it sometimes in the kind of collage collective, that idea that I know we have to move on now in just a moment, but that both the elements in a collage and the words in the poem are quite refined choices, can be quite refined choices, and they also exist in a system of relationship with each other. So page breaks are like scale, or the movement of one element over another, changes the meaning of everything else within the composition, which is something that I find interesting to play with.
I think it's like, I was reading something about those, those moire patterns, one grid on top of another. It's like that for me with words and images. If you put them together and you get something completely different that decenters both of them. And yeah, something about that.
Sure.
I'm conscious of the time though, and
Yeah.
making sure that there's time for us to see your works. And
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for watching. Yes. So I'm just going to go through a couple of different pieces of work. I'm going to read out the associated poetry. I selected 4 pieces, and they come from sort of different starting points, which I think is kind of an interesting way of looking at it. Because again, I'm interested in that idea of a seed, whether it's a prompt word or a piece of paper, or it's a particular, how if we pay attention to that, that can just flourish into something else, right? That can flourish into something more complete or something fuller. So this is a shape poem, and it's poetry integrated into an image, into a collage image. And the actual shape of the poem is labyrinthine, and that has resonance with the theme of the poem, which I would call a thematic integration. This is Lost, and it was made as part of the Poetry X Collage residency. Lost at sea, lost in the stars, lost alone, lost in a crowd, lost in the quiet, lost in the loud, struggling, seeking, wandering as we find our own ways home. So I know we've lost the image there, kind of at an interesting point. But that's that's perfect. Yeah. But we can see, it's just made that choice of putting a little red dot or element in the center as well, right? Just I suppose, getting home, arriving somewhere. So if we can move on to the next image. This is a piece of ekphrastic poetry. This image itself is from the Lexicon of Wonder book. I mentioned a little bit earlier that I was experimenting with a book that was a taller sort of format. Some of this was kind of pushback against social media as well. I mean, I think that we have to make our work at the moment in a very specific format, and we have to crop it or resize it just to fit. And I think something is really lost in that. So I kind of want to push back against the boundaries too. This is a book about wonder, and I'm writing about things that are existing in the natural world or also in scientific discovery, and I'm writing about them in maybe a slightly unfamiliar way, just to bring us back into that state of wonder or see them anew a little bit, because there is so much beauty around us and so much wonder around us, but for many different reasons we may feel flattened or out of contact with that. So I'll just read the poem that goes with this. The Grandmother of the Forest. Elaborate, knotted light gatherer, ancient solar forest carer. There is land loneliness and root hunger. Show me how to search deeply under. Many limbed, kindness a shade, ground sprouted and earth made. There is land loneliness and root hunger. Show me how to search deeply under. Invisible sharer of substance and meaning, wind whisperer, solemn standing. There is land loneliness and root hunger. So show me how to search deeply under. So that's that piece. If we can move on to the next image. This is actually a collaborative collage created in response to Mary Shelley's writing. And I wanted to share it because I thought it might be the starting point for this one is to take somebody else's writing as the seed. And I worked on this particular image with Martha Yannick, and I'll just read the passage from the book, which is: several changes of day and night passed, and the orb of night had greatly lessened. When I began to distinguish my sensations from each other, I gradually saw plainly the clear stream that supplied me with drink and the trees that shaded me with their foliage. I was delighted when I first discovered that a pleasant sound, which often saluted my ears, proceeded from the throats of little winged animals who had often intercepted the light from my eyes. I began also to observe with greater accuracy the forms that surrounded me and to perceive the boundaries of the radiant roof of light which canopied me. My sensations had by this time become distinct, and my mind received every day additional ideas. My eyes became accustomed to the light and to perceive objects in their right forms. I distinguished the insect from the herb, and by degrees one herb from another. I found that the sparrow uttered none but harsh tones, whilst those of the blackbird and thrush were sweet and enticing. And it's this really beautiful passage that gives us an insight into the intelligence of the creature, actually, as he is exploring the world first. And we just chose to use a triptych so that we could illustrate those passages of days which are mentioned in that particular paragraph, the movement of time and the exploration and the observance of birds and different flowers. Right? So that's that particular image. And this last image is from a book that I'm working on at the moment, also with Martha Yannick. And this is there's a piece of ekphrastic poetry that we've written in response to that, or I've written in response to this. So we're just having fun with this and with the ideas of flea circuses and flea circus performances, which were once quite common, but have, they're very, very niche now, but yeah. Yeah, but this is Phileas Boomeister, flea cannon performer. There is this flea in his act as a blast. He fires out of a cannon incredibly fast. His colourful cape flaps while he's in motion. His blistering flight inspires a boom of emotion. He is tiny and moves at speed so difficult to grasp, but if you watch carefully, you might see him go past. So that's that last piece, and that's kind of more intended for a children's book or a children's audience. And it's also a collaborative piece. I've made the flea cannon performer, and Martha Yannick has made the audience that we see watching astounded from behind. So that's me, and I kind of open it up if there's any questions you guys might have for me, or.
Anthony, I have a question or something I'd like you to speak more about. And that is, you're an active collaborator, and I think I struggle with collaborating in my own artwork. But can you, maybe I don't like to share. Can you speak about that experience? Because I think you've done it quite a bit.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think it just goes to my general kind of practice or way of being. There have been times I've noticed that I might maybe make a little square now. I don't know if you can see me do this, Rick, but when I was maybe a little bit nervous, I might make a small two-panel illustration and protect my work and then leave a lot of empty space. There is a bit of a challenge in it because you do, of course, need to hand over and you don't know what the other person is going to do. Yeah, but it can be really exciting as well to see a twist that somebody makes on something. It mightn't be the direction that I'm going to go, or it might be a completely different style, right? Or it might resonate in a way that I never really expected. And, you know, I think that can be a really beautiful thing as well, because something that I really love about going to collage exhibitions is, you know, you see somebody do something sometimes and they've folded a piece of paper or they've put something in a particular way, or they've used a texture or material that you've never thought about before. And it's just like this nice moment of, what is that? You know, how have they done that? And, you know, I think I can get a little bit of the same from collaboration. But yeah, I can see why it would be a challenge though as well, because there can always be a little bit of tension in the collaborative process, right? We're different people always trying to maybe overlap and negotiate. So yeah, I hope that answers.
Yeah, I think it's kind of beautiful how collage lends itself to that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, we're standing into the loop anyway, right? Do you know, because as you pointed out earlier, we're using printed material that somebody else has photographed or illustrated already, right? So it's kind of like we stand into the life cycle of an image a little bit, right? And then we create something, but it also proceeds onwards from there and has its own conversations, or maybe gets cut up by somebody else somewhere, somewhere else at some other time.
Can I ask a quick question? I don't know when we're throwing it open to
Sure.
whoever's here, but just, it was interesting that you started off with, you know, you've got images, some started off as image, some start, you know, the different starting points. And I was just wondering which territory you're most comfortable in, and I mean, also you're saying there's a value in discomfort at times, or the discomfort of, or sort of being out of your comfort zone. But I was just wondering, in terms of starting points, do you have a territory that you're most comfortable in? You know, I was thinking one image has both word and image in it, you know, they're together, and others are a poem in response to an image, or an image in response to a piece of text.
What was that Irish word you used earlier for things being so?
Pichafucha?
Pichafucha, for
Yeah.
being kind of inextricably or
Interwoven.
right? Yeah, yeah. It's a little bit like that for me. Like, I mean, I've always enjoyed language and I've always enjoyed writing, but I've always enjoyed drawing actually, and then later enjoyed exploring collage, right? And something that I like to think about is how we switch from one channel to another, and how if we're feeling a little bit stuck visually, I can find it useful to have a prompt word, and vice versa, right? Sometimes I find an image, and if I want to write in response to that, then that can free me up. And then actually I can use that to return. So I think there's something in changing those channels a little bit that can be really useful.
Yeah.
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 Interesting.
So I know
We're just at, was there time for questions from the people who are here? in the
yeah,
room?
so we'll open it up. I
Accept
know
these.
some people may have had questions from the audience.
Was there a question over there? Somebody said.
I was just admiring that piece and I started to do it out loud. Oh, it wasn't a question as such.
That's
It's very
that's perfect. Thank you.
great.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah.
Hi guys, this is a question for all of you.
say now for somebody now who's kind of venturing into the whole kind of world of collage and they wouldn't know where to start, or they wouldn't kind of know what gets them going. Do you have any advice from your own experiences that you could pass on to somebody that might want to kind of go a bit further with their hobby and maybe, develop it?
Um, I could say something about that, or just briefly.
Yeah, I could too, but
go on, go on.
well, the first thing I would say is just play, right? Play, and something
Yeah.
that you said a little bit earlier about notice what you're drawn to.
Yeah.
Right. I suppose there's a reason that the exhibition outside is called intentional selection, right? And we kind of have to recognize that that's part of the process. You used the word magpie earlier, and something I would refer to often is magpie eye, right? And actually, when you start to make a lot of collage work, then things start to stick out to you like shiny in the environment that call you towards them, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, flicking through things, or I just find things catch my eye. I put it backstage there, but I have a bag of things that I've just torn out, or I'll find something, or I'll go to an exhibition or go to a cinema program, or just things that catch my eye, I think, and both words and phrases. And equally, if I'm reading like a phrase that just, the way you kind of have a phrase that maybe turns around in your head, I'll jot it down, and then I like writing using ink and colored inks as well. So sometimes then just the process of writing out something that's in print, and the longhand thing of writing it out, and then maybe just putting it with another phrase, or so I have a bag that's full of phrases and pictures, and every so often for inspiration I'll just tip it all out and kind of go through it and kind of go, oh yeah, that one, I like that one today, or so I think that kind of process, the magpieing, and then really just kind of going with your gut. Don't think about it too much. I don't think about it too much initially.
yeah, I think the phrase "a bag full of phrases" will be turning around in my mind after the rest of the evening. Rick,
I have two thoughts on that. One is you have to make a lot of bad collage before you make good collage. And I think it's really important to give ourselves permission to make bad collage. I try to give myself permission to make bad collage all the time, because that's how I get to better and better collage. But the other piece is one of community. And a question for Anthony is, does the Collage Collective have regular meetups? Because I do think connecting with other collage artists and just learning from them and watching them and exchanging with them and collaborating is the best way to grow as an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of the reason that we set up the Collage Collective, right? And we do have monthly meetings. And I do encourage people to stay in touch, and also just send out kind of an email with open calls, right? And artists that might have pique people's interest based on conversations we might have had in the meetings, right? Because I do think that that's important. It's great to practice, and sometimes that can be a solitary affair, and sometimes that can be really, really valuable. But it's also important to know that there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of beautiful work out there, and it can be great to see that and pick up on that. And you made that great point earlier, Eve, about being an open person, right? That idea of reverie, and actually how, whether we realize it or not, we are taking an inspiration.
Yeah, we're open systems. We're not closed. We're open to influences, and we're open to things that we encounter, and it all kind of percolates. And I suppose it's just kind of attending to that percolating and making time. Like making time, doing kind of the artist way thing of artist dates, journaling, and then kind of just making time and space to see what you're drawn to. Then it's about making time, I think. Make it kind of ring fencing a bit as
and I do want to put up my hand also and say I make bad collage, right? That happens. I've folders of bad collage, and even like folders on my computer of bad digital collage that I go back and look at sometimes and kind of wonder what went wrong here, and that can be really informative.
And one person's bad collage can be another person's masterpiece. Is the other side of it. So
and you learn from all of it.
Who's to judge? Don't censor and judge. Just, I suppose, that's the other side of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aoife has it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
You
we'll
spoke
go.
about digital there, and as an artist, I find a lot of digital things quite scary, I guess. And collage looks to me like it's very much moving towards digital. Like, is it, you think that there's still room for the cutting and playing and
There'll be,
finding and magpieing?
there'll always be room. There'll always be room. Like, I do love digital and it supported me a lot, but I will always have time for cutting and pasting and tearing. And I think that there's different sort of limitations to different mediums. And while they're both, I would consider both collage, actually they push your creativity in different ways. Like the example that I always use is with analog collage, for example. You mightn't always have the thing that you want or need to complete the image or intend to complete the image. And if you want a ladder, you mightn't have one, but you might have a train track. And once you cut the train track out and you put it on its side, you have a ladder, right? And I think that that pushes our creativity in ways that just having everything available online doesn't really do for us, right? Although I do love working in digital as well. But yeah, I'll open the floor, and I know this might be our final question as well, because we're on our, I'll open to answers, I mean, but
Oh,
this
yeah.
might be our final.
I'm an analog person, I have to confess. I haven't figured out the digital part of it really yet. But I just like the feel of, I like the feel of tissue paper. I like tearing things. I just like the sensuousness of it, and the sort of, for me, that's part of the process, and it kind of aids my creativity, whereas it's a different part of my brain if I was trying to do it digitally. I've got that other bit I'm having to think about, and for me at the moment, I'm not saying it mightn't change, that feels like it would get in the way, or something, but each to their own. And I think there's a value in both, absolutely. And I'm not saying that in a year's time, I mightn't be, if I've figured out the technological bit, I mightn't be passionate about digital collage, but yeah, maybe it's about time as well, and development, and
Perfect. Rick, anything on that before we finish?
Yeah, I think that art is one of the few vocations that people expect us to operate with outdated technology. And so I've always been a proponent of let's use whatever is available to us. That said, one of the things I appreciate about art is its materiality. And we are human beings in physical bodies moving through time and space. And we need to encounter objects in that time and space that are not on screens. So I have a great value for objectness when it comes to art in that respect. Yeah.
the object of a book. And I'm just thinking Red Fox Press were here today in the building showing some of their absolutely beautiful books that are a site for collage. And just to pick up and hold a hand-bound book, it's just a beautiful object, and it's not the same as looking at it online, or it's a different experience.
And I want to build on that, Eve, because Red Fox Press was, I think, encountering their books was one of the single most influential things in helping me understand how important the book was to collage. Because what they've been doing for over 20 years now, it's just been wonderful and remarkable. And they are absolutely beautiful objects. I wish I could afford every one of them. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful point to end on. Yes, thank you very much. So yeah, once again, thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. I certainly have. And thank you, Rick. I hope to see you sometime soon. And
Sure.
yeah, we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
And thank you, Anthony, for organising it and bringing it all together. And for such a wonderful, thoughtful and thought-provoking session.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Cool.